We have got a fantastic speaker lined up for you, who's sitting down the front here, extremely nervous, it's fair to say. We've been chatting through dinner. Some of you may have seen her recent TED talk from Stormont, which was absolutely brilliant. She's going to speak to us to follow on from that and get our rewards evening going. But to welcome her onto the stage, because I'm dressed apparently like a game show host, okay, I'm going to introduce her in game show host style, and you are going to cheer and whoop and really get the atmosphere going. So please, welcome to the stage, the one, the only, Chief Superintendent Una Jennings. Come on!
Okay, I'm absolutely mortified. So, okay. So, Mandy asked me a number of weeks ago if I would come to the award ceremony tonight and talk to you all. And I suppose, really, from my perspective, I was super humbled that you would ask me, and I hope that you're not going to be disappointed, Mandy. Because the truth of the matter is I am incredibly nervous speaking to you all tonight, not really because I'm not used, as you can imagine, to speaking to a large group of people, but because most times when you have an after-dinner speaker, they've climbed Everest or they've won an Olympic gold medal or something amazing. And actually, really what I'm going to share with you tonight is just my story, and it is one that is intensely personal to me and very much anchored in my vocation in life, which is policing. And one that took me, as Elliot has alluded to the seat of our government in Northern Ireland a few weeks ago to speak in Stormont. An opportunity, in truth, that I reflected then and do now as I speak. It gave me time, really, for the first time in many very busy years, to reflect on my life, my professional journey, my choices, my mistakes, and there have been many of those, I can tell you. And I suppose really how important it has been and continues to be for me to really dream and to imagine. I've been asked to speak tonight, I'm quite sure. I hope I'm at the right gig because I'm a cop, and more than any other thing in my life, it has been unapologetically defined who I am. And anyone who knows anything about policing, in truth, especially where I'm from, and despite being proudly of South Yorkshire Police Constabulary now, you can probably tell, certainly the detectives in the room, that I'm not a Yorkshire lass. But yes, more than any other thing, where I'm from, people would expect me to talk about three things: being a young-ish, Catholic-ish woman in an organisation both nationally and specifically Northern Ireland that is very male, and also in Northern Ireland still a very perceptively Protestant vocation. Instead, I'm going to tell you about my story and really probably share with you, I hope, some of the experiences and the things that I learned through my education in Thornhill College in Derry that really prepared me for what I do now. And it's a series of memories and, I suppose, really experiences, from having a house that seemed to be full of books to being encouraged to read and, God forbid, have my own opinion from a very young age, and then my grandfather and the stories that he used to tell me. And I suppose for us, as we gather here tonight, that concept of story is incredibly important. I remember one time him telling me, and for those of you who know me from Northern Ireland, I know it will be hard to believe, but after a particularly melodramatic moment, he said, "Una, be really careful about the stories that you tell yourself, because you have to listen to those voices for an awful long time." And there's real wisdom in that, real truth that took me many, many years to even understand, never mind put into practice. And I suppose my reflection on that is this, that I hope the stories that I both listen to, and more importantly, the ones that I tell now, were sufficiently broad enough and wide enough to allow me to be open to the possibility of everything that I could be. Stories that shape my ability to really move beyond what my people and my place and my family would have imagined for me, and really, in truth, shape how I choose to live. We're often told you cannot be what you cannot see. However, where I was born and where I was raised, I was told in our home that you couldn't be what you couldn't imagine. We lived in 30 Corb Court, Ballinagorty. That will mean nothing to you, but take my word for it. It's a place on the edge, geographically and economically. When I prepared for my talk here and I Googled the estate I was raised in, it is a place where in 2018 people are still being shot. It was then and is now one of the top 3 most deprived areas in Northern Ireland, yet the place is in my very bones. It's somewhere between the hills of Donegal and the west coast of Ireland and the city of Derry, in the words of a well-known song. Although I made the great escape to the police service, to Belfast, to, God forbid, Sheffield, I never really got away because I didn't want to get away. It was a place, a people, a family that actually instilled certain values in me, values that I hope I instill in my own daughter today, values that certainly shape who I am as a woman and as a mother and absolutely as a police officer, concepts that allowed me to imagine the unimaginable, that took me all the way to the Senate House in Cambridge as I graduated with my master's degree, and values that sustain me on my policing journey still, and I think they're concepts that you will recognise in many of your own lives because, like most things that work, they're very simple. Courage, compassion, connection, and that desire really to connect with families, with communities, connect the strategic to the very local, and as our Chief Constable Rhodes said today, the head with the heart, because anything worth doing, in particular policing, good policing needs both. So the first of those was courage, and in truth, I learned this at my mother's knee. This is the only photograph that we have of the two of us together when I was a baby, and I'm not talking about some Disney type of courage, I'm talking about real, gritty courage. It's so important. It's so important for us in the police because if you do not have courage, you cannot do anything else consistently well. I learned this from my mum. She is now and was then the most courageous person I have ever met in my life. I was born in Newry in County Armagh, 95 miles away from our home in Donegal. It must have felt like the other side of the world to her as she went there with her bag in her hand and me, a child in her belly, like so many other young women in 1970s Ireland, to live in a convent with the nuns, to have her child and leave me there for adoption. I remember her telling me she wasn't even allowed to nurse me after I was born because they thought it would make the leaving easier. She was just 14 years old. She had me on her 15th birthday. And yet I was there in Stormont with her a few weeks ago, here as her daughter tonight. Why? Because she brought me home. She had the courage to do what she instinctively knew, even as a 15-year-old child, was the right thing to do. The easy thing would have been to leave me. It would never, ever have been the right thing. And she has taught me how to plant my feet in the sure and certain ground that is always the right thing to do and have the courage to dream. In my life, that manifested itself in a number of firsts, and I think our slide deck has just gone a bit awry. I was the first in my family to go to university, the first in my school and my community to join the police, a big deal in Northern Ireland, as a young Catholic girl in particular from Derry. I was in the first squad of PSNI recruits after the pattern reforms to policing. Hugely important, actually, because I feel that I knew at least as well, if not a wee bit better than my peer group, how important it was to have a police service that looked, felt, and crucially thought like the full gambit of the community that we served. It's also latterly been about the courage to bring my whole self to work as a woman, as a lawyer, as a daughter, a mother, especially in this phase of my life as I moved across to England and now took responsibility for policing a city some 4 times the size of Belfast. And despite our very evident mistakes in policing, and God knows that we have made many, I can tell you this. The people I have worked with over the last few years, the people that I'm looking at in this room tonight, are some of the most extraordinary people you will ever have the privilege to meet in your life. They are heroes and heroines. They have a degree of humour and humility and a profound sense of duty and responsibility, and that is to be admired and that is to be respected. What can we learn from this as we reflect on it tonight? For me, it is about having the courage to recognise the world there is and the world that there should be, and the gap, really, in truth, there is in between. We're all getting older every day, but are we becoming adults? Because becoming adult means we take responsibility for the place and the space that we are in. We know better than most in this room what fairness, justice, equality looks like. But have we got the courage to mould the future into the shape of our ideals? If so, what would that story in truth be? The second thing I learned, we'll skip through these pictures, was around clarity. And if I'm being honest, like most things, that comes a bit later in life, because real clarity, I think, comes from pushing and effort. It needs birthed. And what I'm talking about is that agency moment, that moment where you stop relying on external validation to tell you you're doing okay, and you start relying on your own internal criteria. And it came for me, like for many people in my 30s, and it came through trauma, going through a divorce, the constant questions I asked myself about my choices. Was I doing a good job as a mother? I remember one Christmas Eve in particular. My daughter will remember it well. I had just put the Santa toys out when I got the call, "Boss, we have a murder." I couldn't believe it. I was one of 8 senior investigating officers in the Police Service of Northern Ireland, responsible for those non-policing colleagues in the room, responding to homicides and terrorist offences across the water. The other 7 were all fellas in their 40s, and I'd picked up every on-call across Christmas and New Year, and so determined was I to prove as a single mother that I could do it just as well as any of the boys. I hadn't asked for a swap, and there I was on Christmas Eve, Santa toys on the floor, me living away 4 hours from Belfast, the big man due in less than 3, and a dead body that needed attended to. And for me, that clarity began from the inside out. And in truth, really, I understand now why, because actually we know humans by our very nature often seek a purpose greater than ourselves. It's why we leave well-paying jobs for purpose-driven jobs. It's why we volunteer. It's, God forbid, why we have children. It's called the Hawthorne effect. And what it speaks to is the fact that we need that emotional reward, especially as we spoke of our millennials today, much more often than we do material compensation. What we strive for, particularly in policing, is not that tensionless state, but rather that freely chosen task, that worthwhile cause. Napoleon talked about the fact that his army won because they knew what they were fighting for and they loved what they knew. They won because they knew what they were fighting for and they loved what they knew. I know policing, and I love policing, and I know this one single fundamental truth. Good policing changes lives. It is about so much more than crime. It is about hope, education, equality, social mobility. For me now as a commander in Rotherham, rebuilding trust in a community with a legacy as toxic as the one I left in Belfast a few years ago. Imagine it was something that we could all embrace, that all our communities had faith in, confidence, could support. I watched this graffiti go up on a gable wall not far from where I lived in Derry after 2 of my colleagues were murdered. Imagine it was something we each had a stake in, whether you lived in Belfast or Birmingham. Imagine it was something that our communities, neighbourhoods, family, young people had skin in the game. Could you imagine what we could achieve? And the third thing I learned was compassion. And we spoke a lot about this today, and I was heartened to hear it. It's so important. For me, this is about so much more than being sympathetic. I find that utterly frustrating, in fact, because what it is about being empathetic, but crucially taking responsibility for doing something about it. And compassion, for me, is a driving force of any good policing response, because policing is a profoundly human endeavour. You know better than I that you meet people when they're at their absolute lowest. They contact people like you and I when no one else can listen and no one else can hear. And I have been a murder detective for many, many years, and I can tell you this. The look in the faces of the young men that I invariably arrest for murder are not that different to the look in the faces of families that I go to tell them that their loved one is dead. I have met very, very few truly bad people, but I've met lots and lots of broken ones. I ask the cops that I work with every day to be compassionate with each other. This is really, really tough work, and it takes all sorts. We all bring something different to the table because policing is about people. It's about people who stand at a cordon point for hours in the rain. It is about people who constantly put themselves in harm's way. And in fact, in truth, it is about people that sometimes pay the ultimate price. My colleague, Ronan Kerr. Ronan and I were 10 years apart in both service and age when I was asked to investigate his murder. He was killed by terrorists on the 2nd of April 2011 on his third response shift as an officer in Northern Ireland, and I will never forget being asked to investigate his murder. He was killed because he was a cop, and I cried sore when I came home from meeting his mother, and I've cried a lot since. Imagine we could be truly compassionate with each other, not just empathetic, but truly compassionate with each other. People who don't just feel for the people that are suffering around us, but actually feel compelled by a sense of duty to do something about it. And that, my friends, is the thread that should connect us, black or white, rich or poor, in the Northern Irish context, Catholic or Protestant, is that sense of duty that we have to leave a legacy for our children that is better than anything they could possibly imagine. Because the truth is, one day our children will have children of their own, and they will ask us what we did in our place and in our time to make things better. And then finally, connection with each other, with the public, in our heads and in our hearts. That connection is critically important, and I learned this from my father, and that's genuinely the cheesiest photograph that I think he's ever had taken. He's like, freaking, I don't know what he's like in that photograph. But the truth of the matter is this, he's pretty perfect in my eyes. I'm very blessed. At 21 years of age, he brought my mother and I to the Magistrates' Court in Derry, and he adopted me as his own daughter. He gave me a name, he gave me a family to belong to, and he gave me an understanding of how important real connections are. They can be life-affirming. They're about legacy. He taught me then, and he teaches me now as I watch him every Sunday take my grandfather out for a wee run in the car and out to Mass, that what you leave behind is not engraved in stone. It is woven into the lives of other people all around you. It implies a stewardship of the past, reinvigorated in the rituals of today, and implied stewardship of the future. His example wasn't the main thing influencing us as children. It was then, and is now, the only thing. And Robert Peel spoke to that. He spoke to that connection when he said the police are the public and the public are the police. Policing is about so much more than crime. It can be a stepping stone or a stumbling block for communities. It can give individuals, families, neighbourhoods hope and ambition beyond anything they could possibly realise for themselves, because good policing goes to the heart of a community sense of identity and security. It is fundamental to educational attainment, to social mobility, and as I found in Northern Ireland, it was pretty critical to peace. So as we imagine what lies ahead for us in our place and reflect carefully on what we now get to enjoy, a space that was hard fought for by people who came before us, by those who set the tone and the bar that we must reach to and pass. Let's lift our hearts and sights and dream for our place and shape and guard the stories that you tell so carefully. Believe in our promise and in our duty to leave a legacy for our children that is better than anything they could possibly imagine, and understand how the stories that we tell ourselves, the stories that we tell of ourselves, have to be sufficiently broad enough and wide enough to allow us to imagine everything, not only that we could be, but crucially prick our conscience about everything that we should be. That, and make it really personal. In the words of a young girl that was murdered in my hometown just a few months ago, and to an audience that I think can actually put this into practice, I have never been surer than I am now that our role is to make our world better, one piece at a time. So ladies, let's get to work. Thank you.